This is Breaking the Media's Climate Silence. I'm the executive director of Covering Climate Now, a global consortium of hundreds of news outlets with a combined audience of 2 billion people. I've covered climate change for 30 years for outlets including The New Yorker, The Atlantic, Vanity Fair, Time, NPR, and in my books Earth Odyssey and Hot. I'm also the environment correspondent for The Nation magazine, which co-founded Covering Climate Now 2 years ago with the Columbia Journalism Review. The man you're about to meet is a big reason why Covering Climate Now enjoys such vast reach. CBS News was our first big partner, and its stamp of approval helped lead hundreds of other news outlets to join us and commit to improving their own media coverage of climate change. Al Ortiz, the Vice President for Standards and Practices at CBS, has been one of Covering Climate Now's greatest champions. Al is truly a giant in TV news. He's held virtually every senior job at CBS, including executive producer of each of their daily news programs, deciding what millions of people learn about the world every day. He's also a longtime member of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. Most philanthropist theories of change overlook the media, but the media exercises perhaps the greatest power there is in politics, the power to decide what is and what isn't being discussed. And for decades, as we all know, climate was not talked about. And even now, it's not getting its due. And this has made the work of every organization at this conference much harder and your gains more limited. Covering Climate Now helped break that climate silence. And now we're working to improve climate coverage with our partners, not only at CBS, but at NBC News, PBS, Bloomberg, Reuters, and many, many more. We are making progress, but the time is very short. Now, please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Al Ortiz of CBS News. Al, it's very good to have you.
Nice to be with you, Mark.
So Al, when we first met in 2019, you said that you and your colleagues at CBS knew that you had to cover the climate story, but you weren't sure how to go about it. Can you sort of take us through the thinking on that?
Well, it appeared to be a factor in so many stories that we cover. In fact, it appeared to have a role in just about all of our news. And not more than one or two steps removed as a reason or an explanation for things that we were seeing in the economy, things we were seeing happening in agriculture, in weather, of course, food production, migrations. Clearly major economic things were going to be happening as a result of sea rise and temperature rise, and it was happening so quickly. CBS News has a long historical attachment to this beat. It was Walter Cronkite who first covered the first Earth Day, April 22nd, 1970. He did special reports that day, commissioned a bunch of stories that day, centered the evening news around it that day, and everybody thought he was so far ahead of his time and that this problem was so far away. And the theme of that day, he said, he wound up at the end saying, was, "We're out of time, act now or die." 1970. So here we are all these years later, and we're really out of time. And we're really seeing changes happening at an incredible rate. Just over the last 2 years, the fire seasons in California and Australia have just been major news that we've never seen before. What's happening with the shipping lanes, what's happening with the seas, and then we're seeing in the place where you really see it the most, by the way, the biggest change in the last 2 years is in the weather reporting of our local affiliates, of our local stations. Every year, they're covering more severe and more intense and more energetic weather systems. And you're seeing things like polar vortexes going down to Texas at odd times. You're seeing the patterns of tornado alleys shifting eastward. We're seeing this migration coming up from from Central America is really the result of agricultural failure caused by climate change. And we've got to get our hands around it very, very quickly because it's changing at a very, very rapid pace. So yes, we used the expertise of the consortium to educate ourselves quickly and to get stories on the air. They're easy to find stories about this stuff. The question is to do it intelligently, so you're pointing people towards solutions and action that can really make a difference in the time that's available.
That's such an impressive quote you gave from Cronkite about act now or die. And here we are 50 years later. I can't help but notice, though, that CBS really is doing a lot more climate coverage than it used to. Just this year, you've assigned the network's first full-time climate correspondent, Ben Tracy, who came over from the White House beat. You've designated climate as one of the first, one of two rather, big stories for 2021. How much of a role here? Let's just be honest. There's very little that network news needs more in the world than a younger audience. So did that play into these decisions, the goal of getting younger viewers?
It does play into the decision, but it's just a fact. Just as commercially, our advertising revenue is now coming increasingly from climate change technologies, and technologies that are more carbon friendly, electric cars, windmills, renewable power, that type of thing. Our own polling indicates that there's a split between the way older audiences and younger audiences perceive this issue. And Lord knows that our survival is based on the ability to bring in younger audiences. An older audience tends to be a little more cynical about this, a little more resigned to the fact that, wow, this is a really bad problem. I guess, we're almost out of time. Too bad we didn't do more when we could. Younger audiences do not see it that way at all. They are interested in, they've got to live with this. They're the ones who are going to be raising their kids in this. They've got to have, they want to know about what technologies are being developed, what coping mechanisms are being developed. How are you going to be able to own real estate, insure real estate in Florida in 5 years? How are you going to be able to buy and insure real estate in California? How are you going to be able to feed people, educate people? Where are you going to live? And there's definitely not, I know it from my own kids, there's definitely not a sense of, well, we're just going to give up and do nothing. They are definitely determined to do something. We see it in the polling and we see it in the viewing patterns. So that when we do, it's interesting, when we do a series like Around Earth Week, a concentrated series of stories, we really, we see an uptick in the younger demographic around those stories. And that's, to me, that's a very hopeful sign. And I think that one of the things that I tell younger people, that I've told journalist organizations, I've told philanthropic organizations, and that I tell our own organization, is we need to train journalists in the language and the science of climate change so that they are conversant with this stuff and they understand how it all interconnects, because it does all interconnect. And the more our younger journalists seem really, really interested in learning more about this stuff. So I think one of the best ways that educational, philanthropic, journalistic organizations can do to help here is to help with the training and the education of the younger journalists who are going to have to put all these pieces together and figure out how they live in a world of climate change.
And of course, that's a lot of what we at Covering Climate Now do, which is to train journalists to get up to speed on the climate story. And this is going to be airing on April 14th. And we will be in the middle of Covering Climate Now's big next week of Earth Day coverage around the theme, Living Through the Climate Emergency. So my final question to you, and I think we just have about 45 seconds, is, as you know, Al, the peer-reviewed science now says that humanity is facing a climate emergency. So what will it take in your view, for the media as a whole to reflect that emergency in its coverage?
I think it's going to happen. I think there's going to be every year, there's going to be some more dire development somewhere in the world as a result of this. But I think it's going to take the big news organizations, the big newspapers, the big networks. It's going to take a commitment by even the newer media to give this more airtime, give it more exposure. It helps that the Biden administration has put this on the front burner for the next 4 years at least. And I think that will, I think that for us to be able to really make a difference, we need to concentrate on going as far as we can in the next 20 years. We need to almost break down the time frame so that we know that this isn't a problem that's 50 years out. It's a problem that's here now, and we need to make measurable progress every year for the next 20 years to get to a point where we might be able to have some greater influence in the outcome.
And that, of course, is exactly what we're doing at Covering Climate Now with our partners at CBS News. You've been speaking and listening to Al Ortiz. He's the Vice President for Standards and Practices at CBS News, a great champion of Covering Climate Now. I'm Mark Hertsgaard, the Executive Director at Covering Climate Now. You can obviously get more information at our website, coveringclimatenow.org, and we wish you all a very pleasant day. Thanks for joining us.